Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And Jim, it's not often Hillary Clinton makes her way into the good martini, and I assure you she's not in the good martini for the way she thinks she ought to be in the good martini. These comments got quite a bit of attention on Tuesday. She was talking with Christiane Amanpour of CNN, and the question was about civility. The raucous Democratic protests throughout the Capitol during the Kavanaugh confirmation process, Democrats confronting Republican senators in restaurants and other places and that sort of thing. This is the woman who, of course, said we have to accept the vote until she lost, and then she came up with an endless parade of excuses about why that happened. And now here's her take on civility, a little bit different than it was 2 years ago.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about. That's why I believe if we are fortunate enough to win back the House and or the Senate, that's when civility can start again. But until then, the only thing that the Republicans seem to recognize and respect is strength.
And then she said it again.
So when you're dealing with an ideological party that is driven by the lust for power, that is funded by corporate interests who want a government that does its bidding, it's hard. You can be civil, but you can't overcome what they intend to do unless you win elections.
More from Hillary in just a moment, Jim. An ideological party that is lusting for power and is backed by powerful forces. Project much? I mean, Hillary Clinton here really beyond the pale.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of jumps out here is people might ask, why is Hillary Clinton in the good martini? Greg, I kind of feel like it's a good day when Democrats start reading the subtext explicitly out loud as text. And what she says there is basically that civility can only be in place when her preferred party is in charge, when Democrats control the House and Senate. Once the Republicans are in charge, there is no longer a need for civility. Heads she wins, tails Republicans lose. And her idea, you really kind of, Christiane Amanpour is never going to ask this question, but the natural follow-up there is, Hillary, how do you think Republican grassroots feel about the Democrats? Because when she says, they want to destroy what you stand for, they want to destroy what you care about, in the eyes of Republicans, most Democrats want to destroy the unborn. In the eyes of Republicans, most Democrats want to destroy the Second Amendment. In the eyes of Republicans, most Democrats want to destroy the enforcement of immigration laws by ICE. Border security, your right to keep a good portion of what you own. We can go down this list over and over again. There is a reason that each party sees the opposition as a threat to what it holds dear. And Greg, I think the reason is each party is a threat to what the opposition holds dear. At some point, this is a rational way of saying, well, if I think abortion should be banned or there should be more abortion restrictions, and I believe that this is a matter of life and death and that lives are at stake, well, of course I'm going to be really motivated and driven and fired up about this, and vice versa. So again, there's a stunning tone deafness. And just separately, Greg, I just point out, any day Hillary Clinton is in the news between now and Election Day, I think is a good day for Republicans.
Absolutely. The fact that she's so blatantly obvious about how politically calculated she's being, her complete lack of political skills are the gift that really keep on giving. And in the same clip with Christiane Amanpour, Hillary Clinton demonstrates why she cannot be trusted on virtually anything, any statement. Here's just a couple of them. First of all, going back to the 2000 election in Florida.
Look, I remember Republican operatives shutting down the voting in Florida in 2000.
No, they didn't. There were a couple situations where they protested how the recount was going in a number of places. That is not the same thing. And here's what she had to say about herself, of course, as the victim.
I remember the swift voting of John Kerry. I remember the things that even the Republican Party did to John McCain in 2000. I remember what they did to me for 25 years, the falsehoods, the lies, which unfortunately people believe because the Republicans have put a lot of time, money, and effort in promoting them.
Well, that and because most of them were true. Jim, what's your take on her revisionist history here?
Once again, I think of the natural follow-ups that somehow never crossed the mind of Christiane Amanpour. I would really love to say, Secretary Clinton, what was the last legitimate Republican victory? Because, obviously she thinks 2016, we heard her complaining about the Electoral College. Greg, it's just a terrible, terrible crime that no one told her about the existence of the Electoral College before the election day. Also, the fact that Wisconsin was removed from every map of the country she's ever owned. It's really a terrible crime the way these things happen to break this way. Look, I wrote a piece right before Election Day. People know that I was not a fan of Trump. I was, vehemently anti-Hillary. And I remember going through this. And the interesting thing is you go back to the coverage of Hillary Clinton when she first appeared on the national scene. In fact, I believe probably this is the first time most Americans ever saw Hillary Clinton was the infamous side-by-side interview with her and Bill Clinton when the Jennifer Flowers allegations were coming forward. It was on 60 Minutes right after the Super Bowl, huge audience. And the first thing America heard from the Clintons was Bill Clinton never had an affair with Jennifer Flowers. And that, Greg, was a lie. And everything we saw from Hillary Clinton in the 92 campaign and her effort with healthcare and all that kind of stuff said she was arrogant, said that she was duplicitous, said that she was nasty and partisan and alienated allies. And oh, by the way, she also was a extraordinary victim complex, that everyone who was working against her, everyone who against her had bad motives. She was the only sane, sensible, good-hearted person in the room. Everyone was always so mean to her, blah, blah, blah. And here we are, Greg. It is 2018, and we're getting the exact same thing from Hillary. Again, I think she encapsulates so many of the worst traits of the modern Democratic Party. And once again, any day she's in front of the camera and saying politeness and civility will only return once the Democrats control Congress again, I can't think of much better for GOP turnout.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. All right, let's move on to kind of the corollary to this in our bad martini and what could potentially happen if, in fact, people listen to the likes of Hillary Clinton and Maxine Waters and Cory Booker and others who encourage these confrontations with Republicans who just won't do what the Democrats want them to do. So Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky, he was on the field during the congressional baseball shooting last year. Thankfully, he was not hit, but Steve Scalise, of course, was, as well as a couple of staffers, as well as the Capitol police officers who ultimately killed the shooter. And then he was also attacked by his neighbor and suffered broken ribs and a number of other health problems. Rand Paul appeared on the Leland Conway show back in Kentucky, and he was asked about what's going to happen if this intensity and this penchant for confrontation continues.
I think what people need to realize that when people like Cory Booker say, get up in their face, he may think that that's okay, but what he doesn't realize is that for about every 1,000 person that might want to get up in your face, one of them is going to be unstable enough to commit violence. When I was at the ball field and Steve Scalise was nearly killed, the guy shooting up the ball field and shooting, I think 5 or 6 people were shot. Steve Scalise was almost killed. He was yelling, "This is for health care." He had a list in his pocket of conservative Republicans that he wanted to kill. When I was attacked in my yard and had 6 of my ribs broken, pneumonia, lung contusion, all of that, these are people that are unstable, and we don't want to encourage them. We have to somehow ratchet it down and say we're not encouraging that violence is ever okay, ever a reason for or a means for trying to resolve things. I feel that there's going to be an assassination. I really worry that someone is going to be killed, and that those who are ratcheting up the conversation, those who are ratcheting up saying get in their face, they have to realize that they bear some responsibility if this elevates to violence.
And we'll get to Rand Paul's take on how the media looks at this in just a moment. Jim, for a guy who's been through as much as he has in the past year and a half, his wife just announced she sleeps with a gun under the pillow. She never even used to lock her doors. It's frightening for a lot of people. I mean, yes, you have the opportunity for discourse, civil discourse in this country, but we're losing civility, and the Democrats don't seem to care.
We go back and forth after every shooting because there's this attitude of, heated rhetoric causes violence, but only when the other side does it. And so I don't want to be hypocritical about this, but this is our bad martini for the day because Rand Paul, he certainly is not hoping for it. I don't think this is reckless rhetoric on his account. I think when he says there's going to be an assassination one of these days, I regretfully say I think he's right. I don't think this is a wild, crazy response to these things. I don't think it's paranoia. You talk to the Capitol Police, they say they're dealing with a lot more threatening messages and incidents like that. Greg, if I had said to you 2 years ago that there's going to be a attempted mass shooting of members of Congress, that 50 to 100 shots are going to be fired, that one member of Congress is going to be very seriously injured, 2 staffers also shot, and then 2 U.S. Capitol Police will be shot who are assigned to protect the members of Congress who will also be injured. Most people would think, wow, that would be a giant defining event in American politics. And it really didn't, it was a 3-day story? I mean, it really kind of did this. You compare the coverage of that to, say, the Gabby Gifford shooting. Now, we should be having a lot of talk about this after the Gabby Gifford shooting. I think it is kind of fair to say, hey, you can't watch what you say. You can't say that certain words or certain phrases or certain arguments are going to automatically set off someone who's like a paranoid schizophrenic the way the Gabby Gifford shooter was. Having said that, we've had this rising tide, and when you keep saying get in their faces and give them not a moment's peace and stuff like that, going after Cruz in the restaurant, you and I keep beating the drum on this, in part because I think, Greg, both of us, we want to prevent this. We want to ensure this doesn't get any worse. And it's kind of fair to ask, could any Democrat come out and say, we really, really oppose the Republicans. We want to beat them at the ballot box, but we don't want to see them injured. They are our opponents, not our enemies. Greg, do you hear any of that from any Democrat these days?
No, I really don't. I mean, you saw Eric Swalwell say that it was wrong for the guy that tried to stab his Republican opponent at the festival or county fair, whatever that was out in California. Yes. But as far as Chuck Schumer or Pelosi or Tom Perez, head of the DNC, nothing.
Yeah. Beto O'Rourke made one tweet saying that it was not right to harass Ted Cruz's and his wife in that restaurant. No speeches. Remember Obama and the memorial service after Tucson. So hopefully it never happens. Hopefully this does turn out to be paranoid. This does turn out to be an overreaction. But considering the national environment, you don't. And if you tell people our opponents are Nazis, remember the rallying cry for the past year has been the tax cut is going to kill you. Repealing the Obamacare mandate is going to kill you. Repealing net neutrality is going. How many other things are going to kill people, Greg?
Probably Brett Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, he's going to kill you. If I said to you, Greg, be careful, your mild-mannered intern is going to kill you. By the way, I don't know that, so don't get too paranoid. But if I said it, you'd be worried, right? Wow, this guy seems really mild-mannered, but for some reason Jim says this guy's going to kill me. I, at the very least, better keep that letter opener in my desk drawer, not out in the open where the intern can get it. That kind of, when you tell people so-and-so wants to kill you, they're going to react that way. They're going to react very strongly to that. And yes, of course, you're hoping they react by going to the polls. But it's not all that shocking. Somebody might respond, oh, this person actually wants to murder me. I'd better strike out at them with violence first. We are on a very bad road here. I think Rand Paul, more than anybody, has the moral authority to speak about this. Every time Steve Scalise tweets about this, you get some ninnies responding like, what would you know about violence, bucko? Guy who
right.
The last I checked was still on crutches because of it. May never walk the same way ever again. We are an ignorant, angry electorate right now, Greg, and it's ominous signs for the future.
And you mentioned that it was a 2 or 3 day story when the congressional baseball shooting happened. There was coverage that day. There was coverage the next day because that's when the game was. And pretty much that's it, except for a little bit of update on Steve Scalise. Basically, they talked about it again when he came back to the House floor. Rand Paul talked about the media double standard on this, not just in that situation, but with the attack from his neighbor. Here's what he said.
This is sort of the double standard. If it's an accusation with no substantiation, it's utterly to be believed. In my case, it wasn't an accusation. I actually was assaulted. He's now a convicted felon. There is an instability and a violent nature in this man. There still is a risk of him committing further violence, and yet the media discounted that completely because they don't like my politics.
I think there's a lot to that, Jim. And if you go back to the first clip, he said something I don't remember. Maybe you do, where he said the shooter at the ball field said this is for health care. I don't ever remember that being reported. And you can better believe that if the parties had been reversed and that this had been about Obamacare back in 2010 or something, that would have never been something that we couldn't remember because the press would have repeated that over and over and over again, and rightly so.
Yeah, as recently as a year ago, Greg, the New York Times editorial board said that the shooter in Tucson was motivated by the Sarah Palin map on Facebook. Not only was there not any proof that he'd ever seen it, not only was there any proof that there was anything regarding a even remotely identifiable traditional extremist ideology at the heart of that shooter. This was a guy who believed that punctuation was an evil conspiracy. This guy was really obsessed with commas and semicolons and hit every description of a paranoid schizophrenic, meaning he's hearing voices in his head. He is not sane, right? So you can't tie it to, all that anti-Obama rhetoric made him. No, he was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. The idea, now this guy, as far as I know, the shooter in Alexandria was, we volunteered for Bernie Sanders. Had been, friends said he was very politically active. It's not the least bit surprised, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes. This is not an unbelievable mystery here about what his motivation was. And it's just deeply frustrating that there seems to be this belief that rhetoric can be dangerous, but only on one side.
All right, let's move on to our crazy martini now and some lighter fare. The 2020 campaign, not too far away now, as we know. That will pretty much start the second we know who did well and who didn't in the midterms. Certainly by early 2019, we'll have a pretty good idea of the dozens and dozens, perhaps, of Democrats who want to be the next president of the United States. But one person is taking a formal step towards that possible decision. Michael Bloomberg, according to NBC News, announced Wednesday that he had re-registered as a Democrat in a sign that the former New York City mayor could be seriously considering a presidential bid in 2020. Quote, "At key points in U.S. history, one of the two parties has served as a bulwark against those who threaten our Constitution. 2 years ago at the Democratic Convention, I warned of those threats." Bloomberg announced in a post on Instagram that he also shared on Twitter. "Today, I have re-registered as a Democrat. I had been a member for most of my life because we need Democrats to provide the checks and balance our nation so badly needs." Yeah, he was a Democrat until 2001 when he knew he couldn't get the Democratic nomination to be the mayor of New York City, so he ran as a Republican. Then 9/11 happened. Rudy Giuliani told people to vote for him, so they did. And then he got reelected a couple different times, switched to independent. Now he's back as a Democrat. And, Jim, if there's anything the Democrats will want in challenging Donald Trump, it's a guy in his 70s who's flirted with many different parties and is filthy rich.
Greg, I'm going to do something really, really uncharacteristic here and show a molecule or two of sympathy to Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg doesn't really fit in well with either of the two parties. He is way too much of a nanny state, vehemently and passionately anti-gun. Government knows best. I know best. I will take away your large soda. Diminutive, Napoleon complex, power mad, some might say. There's no way this guy's, could fit in the Republican Party. But the interesting, everybody knows Bloomberg. He founded Bloomberg News. He's always been very closely tied and connected to Wall Street, the investment world. He is not socialist in that sense. And in fact, not only that, he is not, the entire time he was mayor of New York City, for all of his flaws, and you and I have discussed many of his flaws, most people in the business world and Wall Street would say he was never that hostile, that generally he was pretty good, unless, of course, you were a bar that wanted to have people dance, because you needed a special permit for a dance floor, and if you danced without a license, Mike Bloomberg and the NYPD were going to shut you down. Yes, Mike Bloomberg literally turned into John Lithgow in Footloose. He's banning dancing. And, let's just point out, remember that image of New Yorkers being tough and independent and, rough around the edges, and nobody tells New Yorkers what to do. Man, did New York get soft during the Bloomberg years. He tried to ban dancing, and he pretty much succeeded. They finally got rid of the soda ban. But this was this creeping nanny state. Oh, also worth noting, Mike Bloomberg, very big supporter of stop and frisk. And we all know how much African American communities love stop and frisk. At one point, he's been told, you guys, the NYPD's record is to do stop and frisk in heavily minority and African American communities. And Mike Bloomberg, in a statement that is either, you may say it's, in his remarkably truthful, you might say it's genius, or you might say it's political suicide, says, well, that's where the crime is, duh. Which, again, probably isn't going to play all that well. I also think, you go back to the Giuliani era, and I realize I'm showing my age here, this philosophy of broken windows, right? That you get the police to handle small crimes like turnstile jumpers or the squeegee men or something like that. And eventually it has an impact on the big crimes like murder. Well, that's how you get situations like the guy selling cigarettes on the street corner, doesn't have a license, he's selling them individually. Ordinarily, you write a ticket, he's gotten a whole bunch of tickets, the cops respond, and this is how the guy ends up being accidentally choked to death, as many cops are responding to this. You can't have the nanny state and let's enforce the breaking of the little laws in order to stop the big ones. Because the nanny state turns everybody into a fugitive, turns everybody into a criminal. And all of this is not compatible with the modern Democratic Party, but he wants to spend a lot of money to try. And honestly, if I'm a Democrat, this actually worries me, not so much because I think Mike Bloomberg is going to win the nomination, but that he's got pretty much unlimited resources and he can spend as much money as he wants trying to build himself up and trying to tear anybody else down. So that if you're Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or any one of the 2,000 Democratic contenders, Mike Bloomberg jumps in and has a lot of money to play with and can promote the heck out of himself and make a long and bloody primary longer and bloodier. So, hey, good luck, Mike Bloomberg. Of all of our crazy martinis, your ambitions rank as one of our craziest.
If he doesn't really have a home, you should just run as an independent. I think you'd be a great third party.
Every couple of years, he would flirt with it. I think generally because he likes hearing people say, Mayor Bloomberg, you should run for president. But the second thing is you would then see a follow-on round of op-eds from usually veteran political consultants, Greg. And the subtext was always, please hire me. If you give me $20 million, I can get you to third place in New Hampshire. It was basically like, when Mike Bloomberg walks around, he may be a rather diminutive individual, but all these consultants, all they see is a giant pile of money, Greg.
Wow. It's just beginning. If you think November 6th is when you can take a break from politics, you are sorely mistaken. Jim, we'll be following it. Talk to you later.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. To all of our friends along the Florida Gulf Coast and in the path of this storm, Hurricane Michael, please be safe. Please follow precautions, and we'll be praying that everyone comes out safe on the other side. And please tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.